Welcome to the second season of Can I Get a Retake, the podcast where education gets innovative. I'm Michelle.
And I'm Michaela. Join us each month as we dive into the trends and technologies shaping the future of higher education.
Stay curious, stay inspired, and come learn with us from today's educators.
How do we grow and change throughout our lives? Our guest today, Dr. Heather Von Bank, unravels this complex journey in her research and in her publication on lifespan development. Dr. Van Bank earned her master's and PhD in educational psychology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison and is currently the chair of the Department of Family Consumer Science at Minnesota State University, Mankato.
She explores the interplay of physical, cognitive, and social emotional domains while introducing key theories that shape our understanding of human growth. From Freud's psychoanalytic approach to Vygotski's sociological theory, Dr. Von Bank provides a panoramic view of how we evolve as individuals. Dr. Von Bank's work aims to inspire curiosity about the factors influencing our development and equip students with the tools to understand the complexities of human life. Join us as we delve into the fascinating world of lifespan development and uncover the patterns that shape our journey from cradle to grave. Do you want to ask the first one?
Yeah, so take us to the beginning. We'd love for you to share a little bit about your background and the path that led you to focus on child development and family studies.
Yeah, I've always been a person who asks questions, and I've always been really curious about the psychology of people. And the more that I went through my undergraduate and as I was looking at graduate programs, I was really interested in the growth and development of children and adolescents. I grew up watching a lot of John Hughes films, Pretty in Pink and 16 Candles, all of those movies, and the peer cliques and the crowds and family relationships and dynamics. That's really what got me into thinking about studying basically adolescent development, and that's what I did for my grad program. And I got a chance to do some really cool research and focus groups for my dissertation, and then I was like, what am I going to do now? I'm going to find a job. And then the job that I currently am at, it's in a family consumer science department, which is like a new old-fashioned home ec. And it's such a wonderful place because we really do center everything on the children and a family unit, right? So all the things we teach, whether it's nutrition, whether it's family processing, whether it's family dynamics, whether it's parenting styles, it really is focusing on the family unit and how that unit is placed in society and all of those microsystems, macrosystems that affect the family. So that's how I really gotten into it. But it all started with John Hughes films, and I love watching teen rom-coms now even. So it's kind of how I got started.
Sure. Can you also share a little bit about your journey of becoming an author with us? You know, what inspired you to create your own textbook?
I love reading. I love books. I always thought of myself as a wordy person, but I never really honestly thought that I would write a book. I had that in the back of my brain. I thought maybe I could be like a children's author, and I would love to focus on the things that I love and bring that down to a children's level. But really what I do is I work with college-age people, and it makes sense that my publication is directed towards college-age people. And I really just felt a pull to write and rethink sort of development in a way that would make sense to college-age people to reading it. Textbooks right now are not right now. They've always been massive, but it's hard to cover the entire course of a lifespan of a human development in a digestible, 18 weeks kind of thing. I just wanted to push myself to see how that would look from my viewpoint, how that would look from my lens on society and families and culture and relationships. And it was, I think in the foreword, I kind of talked about it like it was as a baby. It was like 9 months of like gestation with this book, and thinking about all the, like, I went back to, I have 2 children who are 11 and 14, and so I went back to like the baby books that I had, thinking about their development and what are the issues about prenatal development that I need to be talking about now with my students. So it was it's been a really fun and super scary process. Yeah. Scary and just like I've never done that before, but I felt really supportive by the staff, and that really that's what helped keep me going.
Yeah, good.
We love to hear that.
Yeah.
And I'm really curious about the title that you have. What resonates most with students?
Thank you. A lot of our students are required to take the class, right? And the class is called Lifespan Development, and you can find that title, you can find the content in a course with multiple different titles, whether it's human development, it could be intro to developmental psychology. In my area, we really do focus on it from a lifespan perspective, and that really translates well to the people who take our classes. Nursing students take our classes, dental hygiene students take our classes, social work students. I've had folks who are going to be police officers or working in corrections take this class, really because we want to think about how humans are situated across a span of life, and the points in which practitioners or mental health folks and educators come and interact with people along that lifespan perspective. And that's really, you might not see one person more than just in their first grade, and you might only see first graders, right? But we know that first grader was a kindergartner before, and they're going to be a second grader later. And we're also hoping that we're creating citizens of the world that are motivated in positive ways. So I like to think about it as we're meeting people at certain places, but we have to be mindful of the whole process, and all the other people in their lives who are at different processes, right?
So I'm glad you mentioned your foreword a minute ago, but because we have a question about the foreword. You also mentioned that the human process of development really begins with love. So what is the role of love in the human story?
Yeah, I'll get a little nerdy here because it's what I do. When we think about those early theories of development, it's all about attachment, and it's all about finding ways to be accepted by our caregivers. And when that love is not met, right, those needs are not met, then individuals struggle with that throughout their whole life course, right? So Erickson gives us the early stages of really attachment and in opportunities that people have to create those attachment processes, really set the stage for later relationships in people's lives. Love is also the thing that helps us sort of like define our passions in life, right? So I tell my students, I'm like, there are classes you are going to take that you are not going to like, but you have to find a kernel, right? You have to find one little bit of it, whether it's, I'm not going to dump on, economics, that one kernel that you can relate to. I remember doing like, profit losses and growth and thinking about that. Like, I'm never going to need this, but like I had to find a way to make it interesting for me. And I think that folks try to embed that into my class too. Like, you might not ever be a parent, and I'm not suggesting that and even thinking that all people should become parents or need to become parents, but like, if you're going to work with humans, you're going to need to know about this theory and how it affects children and parents and families, and that's really how I try to like think about things. Like, I know that a lot of students might not think of themselves as being a teacher, they're going to be an educator if you're working with humans, right? And whether that looks like role modeling, or whether that looks like direct instruction, or maybe it's just interacting with your nieces and nephews, there are things that we can learn about, and all of that is really rooted in love and respect, and acknowledging that we're all, humans trying our best.
We're all going through that same cycle. We'll all hit each of those stages at one time or another. It's really interesting. We recently interviewed a sociologist, and how much sociology and psychology really seem to converge in this discipline as well.
Yeah, my degree is in educational psychology, so it's like a social psychologist almost. Like we're not just looking at humans within a small little person. We're people, right? We're looking at humans as people, and how do we interact with others in different groups, right? So I see a lot of my students want to work with children in very direct services, right? Whether they want to become like child life specialist, or they want to become family consumer science teachers, we're all going to go through those different developmental pathways or well, timelines, if you will. But there's different things in our life that are going to shoot us off that course, right? So if people have a pregnancy at a different time in their life, maybe when they're 40 or maybe when they're 15, right? All of those different normal courses in life, if they happen at different times in their life, that's going to really judge people's timelines in different ways, right? Thinking about disabilities too, and if individuals face a disability earlier in life as compared to later in life, how that affects their coping mechanisms to address and accommodate and provide opportunities for them to still grow, right? And love and function.
There are a lot of experiences that your students are probably never going to live. So, how do you integrate some of those real world applications and experiences into your classes, knowing that they'll never maybe go through that themselves?
When I was writing the book, I was really mindful about bringing in current events and real situated life experiences of people in the world. So I talked about the Flint water crisis and how lead poisoning isn't something of the past and something that we think about as like, oh, everybody has clean water, when in fact this is a sustainability issue in our community, in our place in the world, right? And we have to think about, where does our water come from, and what are the systems that are getting in the way of people getting access to clean water? So I brought in stories about the Flint water crisis, and I'm very passionate about looking at the maternity health crisis, particularly for women of color, and addressing the fact that women of color are at a higher rate of dying pre, during, and post partum or pregnancy, and really looking and diving into personal lived stories of those family members who have lost their mother, their wife, their sister, because of the medical socialization where we aren't meeting their needs, right? And we're losing a lot of really important people in our lives. So, I really try to bring in a lot more of current events. And I know that other psychology books and textbooks are really prone to doing that. I think I really try to make it the core component of what I do. Because a lot of these students are going to, like you said, walk away and they're going to maybe lose that little bit of it because all they needed was this class to become a dental hygienist, right? But if there's something that I can tell them about, like, kids who have anxiety and they're sitting in their dental chair, right? How are you going to provide distraction? How are you going to provide comfort for them? And how can you make connections with these kiddos and help them in ways that, like, they may never fully understand till later on?
Just kind of digesting that a little bit. I think that tie into current events really will resonate with students. it resonated with me as I was looking through your publication to come up with the questions to ask you today. One thing I saw you repeat a couple times in your text is that old nature versus nurture debate, and the fact that it really isn't so much a debate anymore. And I'm asking you now, where does the research stand, and how can lay people like us understand the varied sources that shape our development?
Um, I'm not an expert in the nature-nurture debate, but I do enjoy playing devil's advocate. When I ask my students, I say, who are you? Are you more this? Are you more this? And then I'll push them and I'll say, well, I understand that you were brought up in this kind of household. Imagine if your genetics maybe were prone towards, your household was a very extroverted household. Everybody had big conversations and you're kind of an introverted person, right? Like, how does that jive with your family interactions, right? And in a different way, right? Like when we're thinking, what if somebody is born with the club foot, and imagine their life and how that's going to affect their whole experience with the medical complex and systems of oppression where maybe they don't have access to certain medical needs that maybe in folks living in non-industrialized countries might not have access to, right? So I kind of throw in lots of different scenarios, and I think we're finding more evidence for genetics, and we always know how much environment plays. Just when we think we have a handle on one thing, it changes immediately. So my colleague is a twin, and the things that she has told me about just being a twin is fascinating. The ways in which that they're similar, the way that they're actually like mirror twins. So like she's right-handed and her sister is left-handed. So there's those curiosities of like, what is it that genes that make us similar or different? But they were also the middle child of a family, and maybe they were babied a little bit more, and they were, how their identity was also as a twin also affected how they became professionals in the world. So it's a great way to play with theories, and it's a great way to get students to have those theories come to life, because theories are they feel kind of old-fashioned, like, just talk about it on TikTok. Well, people on TikTok are also talking about, environment and genetics, right? I like to bring in a lot of those things into the classroom, particularly that focus on sort of like taking some of those ideas that we always thought were like, that golden idea of what it means to be male or female, and what it means to be, good at sports because you're tall, right? Like, I'd like to turn those things upside down so that we can really rethink, like, what do those things actually mean? And a lot of it is environment. A lot of it is our societal ideas of who's allowed to do these things, right? Fun. It's fun to mess with their minds.
Well, and you mentioned them sort of poo-pooing some of those theories. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of the theories have evolved over time. So what are some of the major theories and concepts that you've seen change just over, during your time as a researcher and a professor?
This is kind of a broad theme. It's not like a particular theory, but like a theme that's sort of like been carried through a lot of our ideas about parent-child relationships is that the parents affect the children, right? Parents raise the children, they make the baby, they feed the baby, and then the baby becomes a teenager, and they're like, I hate you, I never want to see you again. It's like, well, what did you do, Mom? What did you do, right? But what I've seen and what I take a lot of heart in is that we're looking at the theories evolving and allowing children to have a voice in that narrative, right? they are their own people. They are their own humans. They are their own temperament and personality and genetics and environment, right?
Mhm.
So it isn't a parental direct effect onto that young person. It is correlational. It's bidirectional, and it's that bidirectionality that creates the nuances of relationships that are so fascinating to study, right? I think that's really the heart of relationships. It's that both of those things, both the dynamics are at play, um, and when we acknowledge that, it really makes statistics kind of interesting too. We try to put more emphasis on that statistics. I myself am a mixed methods kind of researcher. I like my t-tests. I like my values, but I also love diving into qualitative research, doing focus groups, doing interviews, because that really helps me understand where did this relationship come from, how did they get here, where are they going, and why, right? Like the whole big why of it. And so much of it is this bi-directional back and forth. So I have my students in a different class read an article, and it really turns their heads, because basically says, like, why should parents matter? And they're just aghast. Like, parents have to matter. And it's not that they don't matter, it's that they matter maybe a little bit less than we thought, and how much peers and school and extracurricular opportunities and power and privilege, socioeconomic status, all of those things are playing a role in that kiddo's life, right? So it's fun to move through those different understandings of theories to just get to a place where we know that humans are complicated,
Yeah.
and we can no longer find just direct effects. One, A causes B to create Y.
That reminds me of an idea that I've come across probably on TikTok, but just the idea that if you have siblings, the parent that raised the youngest sibling is not the same parent that raised, the older sibling, or your experiences are going to be different, even though you're raised by the same people, maybe even not that far apart. And I was like, oh wow, that is really interesting to think about. Yeah.
Anecdotally, that is my experience. My parents were the young parents. 12 years later, they had my brother. They were the old parents, and it was an entirely different experience for the two of us.
Yeah, different developmental stages, right? Different places in their own lives, and also, of course, different experiences that have made them into the different people. I thought this was a cute antidote, but it was basically a woman was talking to an older couple, and this young woman was getting married, and she said, "Give me advice on what it's like to be married," right? She's like, "Well, I've been married to," how did she say it now? "I've been married for 40 years to 4 different men." And she was like, "Oh." She's like, "Well, every 10 years I'm married to a different version of that man, right? Every 10 years we go through a different lifespan marker that makes us a little bit different, right? The ways that career affects us, and the ways that family affects us, and then family members die, and what roles do we take on then? And I just thought that was so poignant to think about how in our relationships with children and with our partners, we're the same people, but we change, and we need to find ways to roll with those changes and figure out how do we roll with those changes, right?
There seems to be a point around middle adulthood, to put it in the lifespan terms, where you see more divorces, it seems like, where people make decisions that maybe they're not compatible with the people they've turned into. So it is interesting. As someone kind of reaching middle adulthood, I was wondering if you have any advice for myself and Michaela here.
It feels a little different too, depending on our ideas of what is middle, right? Like what is late, what is early, what is middle, right? I'd love advice too. What do you got? No.
Moisturize.
Right. So I'm competing, like I said, an 11-year-old and 14-year-old, but I am an older parent in my area where I live. But I know in other areas of the country, of the world, I might be a younger parent, right? Or even older than, or I don't know. So much of that is also placed. The idea of what is middle age is also placed in the places that we live, right? What did someone say? That the Golden Girls were really just in their 50s?
Yes.
Right?
I've seen that too.
And we thought about, I don't know, back in the 80s, we thought, oh, those ladies are so old. oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
That could be my mom. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, exactly, right? So I think a lot of middle-aging things it's just all those different career and life changes that happen at different stages in our life. And sometimes, sometimes we're ready for those changes, and sometimes we're not. And even as much as you can be prepared for, parents dying or career readjusting. When we think back in 2008, the financial collapse of a lot of different systems, I saw a lot of my students talking about their dads who had lost their jobs, who were all retooling, right? They were all going back to college. They had been in the financial industry, and they were going back and becoming nurses and going into healthcare professions because that line of work has changed. A lot of folks going into the trades right now, and it is this interesting ebb and flow. When we think about like how much can the human body also do those different trades as well, right? And it's fascinating how much in the middle stages of life we're really focused on career as being a part of our identity. And if that career change happens, are we no longer that person, right? If that, I always thought I was a banker, I always thought I was this, and now I'm no longer that, right? So I think as much as we can be nimble in addressing those things, I think that really is the secret to moving through those things. And I think younger folks are better, I don't know, are better at removing themselves from that identity of I am my job, right? Because of maybe more gig economy type of how being part of a gig economy maybe has changed their nuances of I'm not just this. I'm actually 4 different things, right?
Yep.
And I actually do this on the side too. When I knit and I climb mountains, right? So I like to, when I meet new people, I try not to ask what they do. I like to ask what do they like doing, and I think that kind of helps to maybe uncouple us from our jobs too, right?
I've read that that's kind of an American tendency to ask that question right off the bat. What do you do? And with the assumption the person will tell you their profession or their job. And I agree from what I've seen of Gen Z, if you want to group people together under that title, they do have less of an attachment to that title. Even people within this company.
I'd argue that it might not be by choice, but just because of the way a lot of people job hop around to get better pay. So if, our pay were to be more stable, or what maybe you expected when you graduated or what you were hoping for when you graduated, then you might not hop around as much. We might not have the same. Food for thought.
No, I love that thought, and I think that that's also a part of societal impact, right? Like when folks were coming out of college, they were coming into one of the toughest job housing markets that we've seen, right? So it wasn't that you were like, look at me and how gritty I am, right? It's like I am opportunities and seeing what sticks out, right?
Mhm.
I think, yeah, I'm constantly amazed by the young adults that I work with and that I see. You know, they're working 2 or 3 jobs, and they are. I'd love for them to spend a little bit more time on schoolwork, but like they're so, you know, and they're connected to their families and their friends and their relationships and their community organizations. So many of them volunteer, and they're, you know, I wouldn't say that I feel that much different as a young adult, but I can see their different sort of motivation in different ways. I think that the loans crisis is really factors really heavily on a lot of young people and what careers they want to go into as well. So a lot of my students are, when I advise them, they're like, okay, what job can I get, right? What job can I get? I'm like, well, let's not think about a job. And they're like, but it's a balance of trying to educate and also trying to empower them, right, to be ready for jobs that don't even exist right now, right?
Yeah.
And that's an interesting place to be as a publisher and as a professor, preparing students for jobs that are changing right now.
Especially with the introduction of artificial intelligence. It's hard to, envision what the world will look like 3 years from now.
Absolutely. And I think if we're not accommodating to those changes, we're going to be left behind.
The question I have is, in addition to AI, in addition to like going back to 2008 with the financial crash, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected society in the sense of how have the processes and timelines of human development maybe changed or altered?
I if you would have asked me that question 4 years ago, I would have said everything's different. We're going to think about things 100% differently, and I think we think about things the same way that we did 4 years ago. I mean, for better or for worse, I really do. I know that our educational structures have changed. I know that our ideas of maybe who our vulnerable population is, I think we've come to understand that a little bit more. But I don't know that we're doing anything different to help people. I mean, it's kind of a Debbie Downer response to that. I study the development of children, specifically looking at play and how important that is in children's cognitive, physical, emotional, social development, right? And during the pandemic, when we were isolated and not only were we isolated to our households, children's extracurricular activities were shut down, right? We couldn't go to the soccer games and the hockey games, whatever. Like, we couldn't do those things, right? Did the kids sit in their room and play a lot of video games? Yeah, they did. But you know what? They also played. They also went outside and they dug a hole, and they climbed a tree maybe, and maybe they just played stick hockey with their friends in the neighborhood, right? And I was hopeful for like a heartbeat that maybe as a society we could get back to, I don't want to say back, but like refocus on the way that unstructured free play is the way that children become who they're meant to be. And I'm not dissing like extracurriculars. I think that they're a great opportunity for children to hone their talents and their skills and find opportunities for being a member of a team, and finding their way within leadership and all that kind of good stuff. But like, I think we've gotten away from how children need chances to be away from adults, and how oftentimes extracurricular sports become adult-led, and the fun gets kind of sucked out, right? Because we're got the next thing, right? So, and I think 4 years later, we're people are back on their teams, I'm not against it. I just it's a realization for me how folks they're really gravitating towards these opportunities for being in a group, and that's really what the pandemic taught us, that we are group humans. We want to be with others. We need to be with others, and particularly children. They want their adults nearby, right? And opportunities for play across the lifespan are dwindling. People like to play pickleball, and people were playing it and was like, this is fun, and we're like, actually, wouldn't it be better if we were super serious about it? Like, wait a minute, I thought we were just playing. No, now we have tournaments and teams, and let's make an Olympic sport. Like, I thought we were just gonna play.
I was just going to ask if there are any, what advice then do you have? Like, how do we find play as adults? What do you do?
What I do for play is probably what a lot of adults do for play, is that they don't recognize that it's play. It's playful, right? Like, I like reading romance novels. I like sitting outside in the hammock next to the lake. I like going for walks with friends. I like going to book club, right? All of those things are my versions of play. I like cooking. That's my version of play, and baking. I know it's not everybody's version of play, but that's what's great about play. It's going to look differently for everybody, right? We're gonna hone into those things that we really like. I like to go up to the lake and sit and also jump in the lake and do stand-up paddleboarding. So, we all have those things that help us to unwind, and I hope people have more of those opportunities, and maybe we can just recognize that it is play. It doesn't have to be crafty. I think I always used to think that, like, if I wasn't like crafting a thing, and like, I've tried all the hobbies. Like, I was like the stamp crocheting, and I did knitting, and I did cross stitching, and I was like, I guess I'm just not like creative. Well, I'm just not crafty, but I'm creative, right? And if we can be more inclusive in our ideas of what play is, I think we can recognize how much we actually do play, and what we do in our lives to help us, regenerate and sort of rejuvenate ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting, because it sounds like you had the idea that in order to play, you had to have something consumable, or you had to create something tangible, so you could look back on it and say, hey, it was worth it to play because something came out of it, something was created out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's a carryover from a lot of our adult notions of downtime. Like, what is downtime worth? Well, it's worth it if you can show others that you did something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I had a Facebook picture with me doing this thing. I went to the art fair and I bought these things, right? We're just very focused on that product, and that's really what I've had to deconstruct for myself is a more process-based way of thinking about play and thinking about creativity. It's not for me the outcome of, and for other people it is the outcome of the thing, right? Making the beautifully sculpted pot or vase, or but I enjoy watching people do that.
But I'm glad you brought that up. So I recently started doing pottery for fun. And part of I don't know, I just instinctively was like, oh, I can make these things and then sell them. And then it was like going to be job. And I watched a creator on TikTok that is a commercial pot, or like the potter that sells her items. And she said, I'm losing the love of it because I have to do it. And I was like, that will not happen to me. So I'm actively trying to not go down that route, in my mind of like I'm will be selling these, like I'm just doing it for fun. But I think we do have also a natural tendency, if you are a crafter, to assume that in order to make it worth your while, you'll need to sell the crafts and make money off of it, or at least, pay for your supplies or whatever. And that's just, got to turn that off.
I agree, and it takes. We've lived a long life enough for us to get that ingrained. We almost have to live that long to like uningrain it, right? We have to disassociate from that sort of model of it's only worth it if you can monetize it. Right? With my students, too, I'm like, you may never think about this class ever again. You may walk out of this class and never think about, Erickson's psychosexual theory of development. Like, cool, that's okay. But maybe you'll remember the one thing on that one day you felt really good because we talked about cliques and crowds in adolescence and we thought about your favorite John Hughes film, right? Like, if that's all you get from it, like, cool. I'm not so bold as to think these students are like gonna, talk about my stuff later, but from something that we're doing and that sticks with them, then I've done my job.
Kind of tying some of this all together, what lessons has your research and your years of working with students taught you in terms of bringing up your own family? You talk about the importance of adult play. How do you approach that and instill that value or that understanding in your children?
Before I had kiddos, I was a professor, and I was lecturing about child development and prenatal development, and sometimes I felt a little like a fake, like I wasn't, oh, she doesn't really know, right? Like, and I had nieces and nephews at that point, and I had, a PhD, but I still felt like I was.
Imposter syndrome never leaves you.
Imposter syndrome is unfortunately the air we breathe sometimes in academia, right? So I let go of that, and then I became a parent, and it's enhanced my storytelling, but it hasn't made me a better parent or a better professor. I think it's I had more things to share, but I'm not sure. And I've taken a lot of that research. So when I'm talking about parenting styles, and I'm talking about ways in which we can talk with children and keep a respectful tone in addressing those conversations with kiddos, whether it's disciplining or whether it's, having hard conversations about death or divorce or those really big topics, right? Like I've carried that with me home, and then I carry some of the stuff that I have at home with my students, and I'll say, oh, you won't believe the blow up my kiddo had today, right? Or I'll be thinking about something in class and be like, oh, I needed to hear that today. I needed to reread that theory and know how important it is to get on their physical level and approach it from this lens and acknowledge my biases, but still be able to come at it from a curious place, right? So it has affected. It's bidirectional. I'm a bidirectional. Particularly when I talk with students about play, I don't even think young adults realize how important play is for them, and when we talk about it, that's really where it comes in and helping them do some self-reflection, right? Like, what are the things you enjoy doing as a young person? How do you still do you still do some of those things? And if you don't, why not? And what do you do instead to sort of like relax and find a way to be in the moment, right? And that's a good reminder for me to also be in the moment and be reflecting on life instead of just having it kind of pass me by. So I love the iterative process that I can bring things home, and I can bring things from home to work too, at least on a one kind of level, right?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that brings us to our very last question. It's a little segment that we do at the end of every episode called You're Wrong. Not you, but Michelle and I, and maybe our listeners. This is your time to set the record straight about some misconception in your field.
When we praise children for how smart or how good a job they did, it actually doesn't help them have a better mindset about their process, right? So children are constantly praised for the things that they do, right? A good friend of mine, I was watching her little boy, and he was like playing with the truck, and he was like moving the truck, and he was like good jobbing himself as he was like moving it, and I was just like sitting there watching, like good job, good job, good job, because he's so used to hearing that. But what we know is that children learn better from feedback, and they learn better from real affection, commenting on real things. So the next time a kiddo gives you like an artwork, instead of saying good job, you say, can you tell me about your artwork? Tell me about why you made this blue here instead of green here. Tell me about the movement here. It's more involved. It takes more effort and more energy, because saying good job is easy. But if you actually want to make it a teachable moment, and a moment in which you can like really sit in it, like have a conversation about that thing, go back and forth. Because it's the adults who are the praise monsters. We're the ones who want to praise kids, because guess what? When we praise others, we're really praising ourselves. Right? So I tell my students, I'm like, if you want your roommates to clean their dishes out of the dishwasher, praise them for how much of a great helper they are. And I really appreciate it when you do this, instead of praising, instead of like giving them hell about something else. That's what I would say you're wrong about. But we're so ingrained to saying good job, or you're so smart to children. If we just pause it, the thing that you can say oftentimes that makes way more sense is thank you.
Really?
Instead of saying good job, because I would rather have the kiddo be evaluating their job as opposed to the adults always evaluating their job.
I'm definitely going to be thinking about that later.
That goes back into one of your original statements about the bi-directional relationship between children and adults, and seeing children as actual people with their own emotion and thoughts and processes. And I think a lot of adults do not do that.
For kiddos, they really hone into that, and then what happens when they don't do a good job, right? Like then their sense of identity can really be like shaken, right? So I try to let them evaluate their job.
Do you feel like that's hindering at all? Like, I mean, we should tell them good job sometimes, right?
What I like to do is tell my students, if you say good job, follow it up. Like,
okay,
good job is like immediate thing, but like say, good job. Thank you so much for putting your shoes away. The space, now we don't have to worry about people tripping, right? Like,
okay.
It's not just about the job, it's about acknowledging the thing that they did.
Mm-hmm.
And you remember like when you go to the swimming pool with your mom and you're like, Mom, watch me, watch me, watch
Yes.
me, watch me. We just want you to see them.
Yeah.
You just want to be seen. And sometimes I'll just say, I see you.
Okay.
I see you.
Thank you, Heather, for joining us on today's episode. One important takeaway from our conversation is that we are all experiencing life for the first time. You might not be able to take back all of the times that you told a child, good job, but you can consider your actions and attitudes towards others at any stage in their lifespan the next time you interact with a fellow human being.
There was a phrase early on in our conversation with Heather where she said, if you work with humans, you are an education. And to me, that makes all of us educators and all of us students. And as students of life, there are things that unite us. We all want to be seen. We are all affected by the immeasurable forces of both nature and nurture. And we all share a path, albeit with different bends and turns along the way. But to understand that path is to understand what it means to be a person and how the definition of that personhood changes across the span of time.
Thanks for tuning in to Can I Get a Retake, a podcast by Great River Learning. If you liked the episode, show your support by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a review on your favorite podcast platform. For detailed show notes and transcripts, visit greatriverlearning.com.
Can I Get a Retake is brought to you by hosts Michaela Albee and Michelle Manneman, with editing by Maggie Christensen. Artwork for the podcast is crafted by myself, and our intro music is courtesy of Comma Media. We'll be back soon with another captivating chat with a top GRL innovator.